What's up guys, Asian here with a PTS video, kind of a preliminary look at the block cost changes that are being implemented in the next DLC, Dragon Bones. So for those of you guys who aren't aware, ZOS did change the way that block cost is going to be calculated in the next DLC, Dragon Bones. They are basically change the base cost of block as well as change how block cost reduction jewelry glyphs are used and calculated when you are when you use them. So it's actually going to end up being a nerf to block cost compared to how it is on live right now. So for those of you guys who haven't been reading up on the patch notes, let's go ahead and swap over to the patch notes right now. Alright, so here are the patch notes. So do keep in mind this is only the first patch of the PTS, so things may very well change in the near future. Let me see if, let's just, there we go. So yes, so this might change in the future patches. There are still 3 more iterations of the PTS patch before it goes live, and even then there could be a difference between the 4th PTS patch as well and the live patch. So all this is subject to change. So right now this is just kind of a cursory analysis of how much block cost is actually going to increase by if ZOS decides to stick with these changes. So you can see here on the patch notes, decrease the base cost of block to 1730 from 2160. So that might seem like a buff. However, the next bullet point kind of changes that around. Jewelry enchants that reduce the cost of block are now subtracted from this base cost first, then percentage reduction to the block cost of block are applied. This means stacking jewelry enchantments and block cost reduction passives will now be less effective than before. So they're basically, it's a fancy way of saying if you used shield plate enchants, it is now a nerf. So for those of you guys who don't know which enchantments that we're talking about this, the shield plate enchant, which reduces the cost of bash by 304 and reduces the cost of block by 203 when you have a gold enchant on it. So normally on live, how this works out is the base cost of block is first reduced by your percentage amount, so however many sturdy pieces you have, and then your CP point passives, and then by any sort of set reductions, skill reductions, and things like that. All that stuff is multiplied together, and you get this percentage of the base block cost. Then you take that base block cost, subtract the jewelry enchants. So in this case, if you have 3 of them, it's subtracting 609 from that reduced cost, and then it is multiplying that, reducing that even further by 8%, which is the Absorb Magic passive if you are using Absorb Magic on the bar you're blocking on. With this new change, what's going to happen is the 609 reduction in block cost is actually going to be calculated first, so it's going to be reduced off of the base cost of 1730 first, and then all the percentages are going to be applied afterwards. So pretty much what they're doing is they're taking the 609 away from the percentage reduction and instead making it out of the base reduction. So it's going to work identically to things like reduced feat cost and reduced magicka cost, where those reductions are taken into account first before percentage cost reductions are calculated afterwards. So this is going to be a fairly large nerf to tanks in terms of block cost. By how much? We're just going to have to do some math real quick. So I'm going to swap over to a calculator here. I'm actually going to move where my webcam is so you guys can actually see it. Let's move it over here. Alright. So let's get rid of some of this white space here. Alright, so here we have several different scenarios up on the upper left hand portion of the screen here. So each of these, basically the first line is going to be the live block cost, and then the line underneath it is going to be the updated block cost if these things remain, if the block cost and all this stuff remains the same between the PTS and when Dragon Bones actually launches. So for right now, this is assuming that you have, so this is the current base block cost, 2160. So it's multiplied first by the reduction from sturdy, so in this case we have 4 pieces of sturdy. Then it's multiplied by the reduction from your CP passives, Shadow Ward, so in this case we're assuming we have 20% reduction from Shadow Ward. then it's being reduced by any sort of passives you have. So in this case, we're just assuming we have the 36% reduction in block cost from the Sword and Shield passive. It's the first passive in the line. This entire quantity is then taken, and then you subtract 609 from it. So we're assuming we have 3 block cost reduction glyphs. And then this entire value is then multiplied by this Absorb Magicka reduction if you have Absorb Magic on your bar. If you don't have Absorb Magic, then you don't get this reduction. So right now, if you have 4 sturdy pieces, basically if you have all your small pieces of armor being sturdy, when you have 20% CP cost block cost reduction, and you are running Absorb Magic, and you have 3 shield plate enchants, your current cost of blocking is obviously just going to be floored, 294. So basically you're just cutting off the decimal points. So it's 294. In the new block cost calculations, the new base is 1730, and we subtract the jewelry enchants first. So we're subtracting the 609 first from the base. Then we do the exact same thing. We multiply it by sturdy, CPs, the skill passive, and then Absorb Magic. And that gives us 443 is our new block cost if you have 4 small sturdy pieces. If we look at this from a absolute increase, relative increase I should say, we get a percentage increase of about 50%. So this is if you're running 4 sturdy pieces, so all your small pieces are sturdy. So that's a fairly big nerf. 50% increase to block cost is not small. Now what if you have all 8 pieces of armor being sturdy? So that would be all your large pieces, all your small pieces, and your shield. So our block cost on live right now is 131. Our block cost when this on the PTS right now is 359. In terms of relative cost increases, you're looking at an increase of 174%. So you're more than doubling the cost of blocking if you have all your sturdy pieces on your armor. That's a really huge nerf there. So it's you're definitely going to be able to feel the sustain changes in fights where you have a lot of mobs attacking you. For example, Therian Archive if you're taking the axes. Trash fights, that's going to be pretty big too. There's definitely going to be you're going to feel the sustain changes if you're blocking a lot of hits all at once. The warrior, I can see that being difficult because of his 4-hit. So this is definitely not a good change. It's not going to really be a buff for most PvE tanks. So now let's take a look at some other scenarios. So what if you have no sturdy pieces at all? Let's say you're using divines on your small pieces, infused on your large, and you have infused shields. So on live right now, your cost of blocking is 457. On the PTS, it still goes up. You're still looking at 528. It is a smaller increase in terms of relative increases. You're looking at 457 times 100. Looking at a 15% increase in block cost if you're not running any sturdy pieces. But let's say you actually aren't running any shield plate enchants, so you're running something like Magicka Regen instead, or Reduced Magicka Cost, or something like that. So on live right now, your block cost would be 854, so you can clearly see the difference. So this is assuming you have 4 small sturdy pieces. You can see the difference here is huge, because it's 294 compared to 854. But if we take it on the PTS, becomes 684, so it is a buff if you aren't using shield plate enchants on your jewelry pieces. It's still, obviously, the shield plate enchants are still decreasing cost of blocking. It's still 443 compared to 684. So if we look at that and in terms of relative terms, 443 minus 684, this is on the PTS right now. The block costs reduction, shield plate enchants, if you have 3 of them, are decreasing your cost of blocking by about 35% on the PTS. So that's pretty substantial. So even though it is going to be a nerf, it's still going to be beneficial to use shield plate enchants. They just won't be as helpful as they used to be. So that is with 4 sturdy. If you have 8 sturdy, then obviously it'll still be a buff, but not nearly by as much. So adding in the 4 extra sturdy pieces here would only give you, well, let's take a look at if you're still using shield plate enchant. So if you're looking at adding in all sturdy pieces instead of just the small sturdy pieces on the PTS, you're looking at about a 18 to 19% reduction in block cost, or in absolute terms, you're looking at about a 90 stamina difference between each block. So that's kind of up to you, whether you want to swap over to 8 sturdy if you weren't using it already, or if you want to stick with 4 sturdy and large infused instead. That's something that you're going to want to play around with. So that's just kind of the calculations here. So these next couple of things are basically like, what if we aren't using three shield plate enchants? What if we're using 2, or we're using 1 enchant? So in this case, let's assume we're using 2 enchants. It's still going to be a nerf. It's not nearly as big, it's only about 10% nerf, but it's still a nerf. What if you're using 1 enchant? This is all assuming you have 4 sturdy pieces, these two. It's going to be a buff if you are currently using 1 shield plate enchant. So you are seeing about a 10% buff if you are only using 1 shield plate enchant. And if you have 8 sturdy pieces, so this is the next calculation, if you're using 8 sturdy pieces, it's still a buff. It's just a very, very small buff instead. It's only about a 10 to 15 cost reduction difference there. So basically what this means is shield plate enchants are still going to be pretty powerful in terms of how much they reduce your cost of blocking, but they won't be as effective as they are on live currently. This is going to be a nerf for PvE tanks. The idea behind the nerf is basically they wanted to kind of prevent perma-blocking builds in PvP. Even though perma-blocking really isn't the issue in PvP, it's more about the damage reduction and damage dealt stacking on top of each other. That's really why tanks are basically so survivable in PvP, because they can stack minor maim, major maim, minor defile, major defile, or not defile, protection, minor protection, and all that stuff. So that's kind of why PvP tanks are just so hardy. It's not because they're able to perma-block everything. Take enough DPS to a perma-blocking tank, and they're gonna run out of stamina and melt. It's really the buffs and debuffs that are making PvP tanks more survivable. So they're basically trying to fix a problem in the wrong way, and as a result, PvE tanks are kind of taking a hit, even though perma-blocking obviously isn't an issue in PvE. Tanks sustain really, yes, a good tank can sustain indefinitely. If you guys have seen my VSO hard mode streams, you know that me personally, on a Dunmer, I can solo this Ozara adds without a healer without any sort of resource help fairly easily. It's not necessarily the easiest thing to tank, but I can still do it. Same thing with the Serpent. If I have to tank Manticora in the back, I can do 2 Manties and the Lamias by myself, no healer. I won't say without any issues, but I can do it. I can do it solo. So sustain on PvE tanks, while it's not really an issue, with these changes, I can foresee it potentially becoming an issue. Now that being said, the PvE community is pretty adaptable. When Morrowind dropped and the sustain changes happened, we all thought that, DPS is going to drop horrendously, and in the end, it seems like DPS has only gone up rather than down. We are able to adapt to these changes. So the changes that I foresee happening because of this increase in block cost. First of all, heavy attacks are going to be a lot more important. You're going to basically need to be able to read a boss fight, know the mechanics, and figure out those windows of opportunity where you can heavy attack to get some stamina back. So that's going to be a fairly large change in how PvE, and at least some PvE tanks are going to approach things. There's kind of this mentality that vet content, like vet trials tanks, all we do is permablock. That's not true at all. If you guys ever see my vet trials videos where I am tanking, you'll see that I try not to permablock that much. I try to weave heavy attacks where I need to. I try to light attack in order to get my enchants off. I'll definitely block when I have to block, but other than that, I'm trying to heavy attack in order to help my sustain out. So for somebody like me who's already comfortable enough with the mechanics, it probably isn't going to change that much, ultimately. We might need to use Ignis Shield a little bit more, we might need to use Balance a little bit more to get Magicka back to use Ignis Shields, but ultimately it's not going to really change too much because we already are used to heavy attacking. It's the people who are starting to learn Vet Trials, starting to learn the mechanics behind this content that's going to have the tougher time here, because they're going to need to learn when they can heavy attack, learn the boss telegraphs, learn the fight mechanics. So there's going to be a steeper learning curve, I should say, to tanking now with these block cost changes. I don't see any PvE tanks quitting or, revolting or anything like that, or even changing the gear setup too much, except maybe for Torx and Alkosh, but that's in a separate video. I just see us changing the way we approach fights instead. So that's one of the first solutions that I can think of. Just getting more used to fights, getting used to mechanics, reading boss movements better, and knowing when to heavy attack. The second thing I can see us doing is moving more towards Balance and the Ignis Shield combo. So for those of you guys who don't know, Balance is, let me actually swap over to ESO so you guys can actually see the skill I'm talking about. So the skill I'm talking about, oh, be quiet, skill advisor. The skill I'm talking about is here, Balance. So you basically sacrifice health in exchange for Magicka. The downside is, and you also gain Major Resolve, Major War for 23 seconds. The downside is any healing you do and any damage shields you create are reduced by 50% for 4 seconds afterwards. So Balance is kind of the secret behind Infinite Sustain behind a lot of tanks. Basically, it's trading off health for Magicka. So basically, the healer, you're largely depending on the healer anyways for your heals, so you just need to know when to use Balance, when, after a boss's heavy attack or something, you use Balance, gain some Magicka back, and then, of course, go back and use Igneous Shields to get your stamina back. So that's kind of the combo that tanks, some DK tanks use in order to basically have very good sustain. So I can see this being a lot more prevalent with these block cost changes. You'll see a lot more tanks running the Balance Igneous Shield combo, which will put more pressure on the healer because, the amount of healing you do to yourself is reduced by 50%, so your Green Dragon Blood will heal for less. So that's kind of the downside there. It's going to put a lot more strain on your healer because you will be sacrificing health. Hopefully it's not that bad. Hopefully your healers are good enough that, an extra springs here or two or an extra orb isn't going to, make or break them. But that's kind of option 2. Option 3, and this is the option that I don't foresee many PvE tanks doing, is swapping out one of either your health set or your utility set. You're swapping that out for a sustain set, something like Lich or something like that. I don't foresee that happening. I still think that, at least for DKs, sustain is still going to be good enough with Battle Roar, with the Balance Igneous Shield combo, and with heavy attacks that you're not going to need to swap one of your sets out for sustain. If anything, the only sustain set that I can foresee us moving to would be to swap out your Monster Helm for Engine Guardian, and that's the only possible change I can see. But even then, Bloodspawn and Lord Wardens, I don't see those coming out of the tanking meta for Vet Trials. Those two-piece effects are just very, very powerful, and it's not worth taking those out for the added sustain from Engine Guardian. So that's kind of the third option there. Tanks moving to sets like Lich or Engine Guardian or something that restores stamina like Bloodthorn maybe. But I really don't foresee that happening. I don't see any PvE tanks swapping gear out for that. So that's kind of a cursory analysis of the changes that are going to happen with the tanking meta based on these changes in block cost. Sustain is going to be harder, which means we will have to change the way we approach tanking, whether that's more heavy attacks or using Balance and Igneous Shield combo more often, or even swapping out, God forbid, to Engine Guardian of all Monster Helm sets. We'll find a way to adapt. This isn't going to be the end of the world. If anything, I think the worst that's going to happen is basically this creates a steeper learning curve for PvE tanks, but I don't think that's really going to change anything. The tanks that are currently, on those endgame guilds, mechanically challenged, what mechanics, Dragon's Crest, they'll find ways to adapt. I'm going to try to find ways to adapt already, so I don't think ultimately this is going to affect too much in PvE. You're definitely going to have to change up how you approach fights, like I said, but ultimately we're going to adapt. It's going to be more or less the same. This is kind of the same thing that happened when they nerfed the block cost reduction to be calculated every a quarter second instead of every half second. People were saying, oh, block cost basically doubled in cost, and nothing really happened. So it's kind of the same thing here. Block cost is basically almost being doubled. I don't see anything really happening. So that's it for this video. Remember, this is only on the PTS, so it is subject to change. They might change how it works out, or they might change the base cost. I don't foresee them changing this too much, but you never know with us. So be on the lookout for the future patch notes, and if anything does change, I will create a update video. So hope you guys found this video informative, and I will see you guys in the next dungeon.